Anybody who believes Aristotle was a god will also believe he never made a mistake. But if you believe he was a man, then he must have made mistakes. And he devoted a whole chapter of his Summa to the errors of Aristotle.
Albert the Great was the guy who taught theology to Thomas Aquinas and outlived him because Thomas Aquinas died young.
What's interesting, too, is that period, which also was in stark contrast to the Greek culture, was how many of the new ideas, like talking about vacuums or Buridan's famous example, when he actually came up, began to develop the impetus theory of motion. He was inspired by the spinning of a blacksmith's wheel. And you don't see, in other words, in medieval society, what you saw in Greek society, the kind of disparagement of techniques because it's getting your hands dirty. The mill wheels and the water wheels and the camshafts, they were all kind of in the imagination of the scholars. As they
What he saw, if memory serves, it was a mill wheel, a millstone, and they disengaged the water wheel, and the millstone continued to roll even though the gears weren't turning. And he had this sort of eureka moment. And the thing you've got to remember, and this is the big difference between why medieval science isn't quite yet science. They never did deliberate experiments, or only very seldom did they do so. Theodoric of Fribourg is a major exception here when he discovered the explanation of the rainbow by doing experiments with glass spheres filled with water. But what they usually did is they relied on empirical evidence that they could appeal to, that everybody would say, yeah, I've seen that. Everybody's seen the mill wheel continue to roll. Or when, what's his name, Roger Bacon showed that the speed of light was faster than the speed of sound. He says, when you see a distant blacksmith swing a hammer, you see the swing before you hear the clang. And therefore light must be faster than sound. So these weren't experiments exactly, but they were appeals to empirical evidence, which the Greeks didn't go in for.
And I'll go back to this this religious basis. Imagine, first of all, the shock of a religious leader who's the son of a carpenter. When you believe, and you're in a culture that believes that philosophy is the highest goal, and being a mere engineer is miserable. Of course, we don't believe that anymore, right? Mr. Bush, Mr. Vannevar Bush, who had to face exactly that same thing during World War II. But when you have this sense that the philosopher is the higher goal, having the son of a carpenter telling you about your religion is like having a plumber show up at a philosopher's convention and tell you about philosophy. You're going to say, yeah, right, get out of here. But if you've got a religion that accepts that God came to earth as the son of a carpenter, then you're more willing to look at millstones, to look at things that blacksmiths are doing. And this brilliant idea I stole from his articles. So. But I got it before he did.
Okay.
At this point, we've been talking for 40 minutes. We've still only gotten to the prelims of the origins of science. And we haven't even gotten to a definition of science, but I think we've sort of worked around
it's coming up with, it's like you start with facts, then you have natural laws, which relate those facts, like equals mc squared, and then you have physical theories from which those laws and facts can be derived.
So it's the combination of facts and interpretation in an overarching view.
A narrative, a story. Now, the main problem there is that the Chinese were right. Through any finite collection of facts, you can draw an infinite number of theories. And we've seen that with I was talking to somebody one time about Darwin's theory of evolution, pointing out that while we have Maxwell's equations, we don't yet have Darwin's equations. So that mathematical step, that interval there is still missing. And he said, Darwin's theory is as well established as the theory of gravity. He says, yeah, and that's been radically changed in the last 100 years. Twice.
There's a wonderful phrase in a book that Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, back. There's a wonderful book on the literal interpretation of Genesis by Augustine. They all start with the letter A. Have you noticed that? It's very confusing.
All the greats.
All the greats start with the letter A.
So makes it easy to find in the index.
This is
Ansel.
true. Ansel, right?
Abelard
Anyway,
of Bath.
anyway, he has a wonderful statement towards the end of the book saying, any educated person, whether they're a Christian or not, knows how the heavens move, and it's a scandal when they hear a Christian quoting utter nonsense and using the Bible as their basis of it, because if they hear a Christian saying that, then why are they ever going to believe the Christian when he says anything about the love of God and all the other things? It's a marvelous quotation. I have it here someplace. But there's a twist to it. The understanding that every educated person had about how the planets move at the time of Augustine was the Ptolemaic system, which was wrong. And it wasn't as wrong as what you would be getting.
Fit the data.
It fit the data. It wasn't as wrong as if you were relying on Genesis, but it still wasn't right. So there's an element about science in that it is always incomplete. It is always willing to question every one of its points. As you say, the law of gravity has changed. There's two very thick books in my library. One of them is the Bible. One of them is Misner, Thorne, and Wheeler, the book on gravitation. The Bible is 2,000 to 3,000 years old. Misner, Thorne, and Wheeler is 25 years old. Misner, Thorne, and Wheeler is out of date. Therefore, we're talking about a different kind of book, a different kind of knowledge.
Yeah, and it didn't bother the medievals one bit.
No.
Yeah.
1,000 years from now, the stuff that we're learning in science class is going to look silly. I hope it's going to look silly. If we've done our job right as scientists, it's going to look silly.
But they obviously appreciated, and they defined this, that the methodology was important. And Buridan said it, and I think William of Conscience might have said it too. Look for natural explanations first before we start asking, well, God must have done it.
Right.
Oh, yeah, wait a minute. I'll find the quote here.
Yeah, but we've all seen the famous cartoon of step 3, suddenly a miracle occurs. One of the fundamental unspoken rules of the game of science is that you can't have a step 3. And you shouldn't be upset when people don't have a step 3. It's one of the rules of the game.
Okay, it was one of the other A's. Abelard of Bath.
All right.
Okay. He wrote a book called Questiones Naturales, which for all of you who are Latin impaired means questions about nature or natural questions. And it was written in the form of a dialogue with his nephew, who was apparently really thick-headed. And he said, in response to an objection that his nephew raised, the natural order does not exist confusedly and without rational arrangement, and human reason should be listened to concerning those things it treats of. But when it completely fails, then the matter should be referred to God. Therefore, since we have not yet completely lost the use of our minds, let us return to reason.
He was an Englishman, right?
Oh, yeah.
If you just took out that short line about God, Richard Dawkins could have said that.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's an English thing.
Well, they have a certain way of, articulating
Certain
it.
sweet sarcasm.
Yes.
Certain snarkiness.
Right.
At this